Hi everyone, this is our fourth week video tutorial, and this is for those of you all who are in either Humanities 100 or Humanities 200. At this point in the term, you all have been exploring in a couple of different directions with different assignments, but in this week you're both sort of tackling some of the same questions here in terms of how it is that we interpret the arts or the humanities and what kind of experience and evidence we bring to it. So I thought a combined video tutorial would be useful for both of you, and we're going to be looking at some of the bigger picture questions when it comes to how we interpret works of art or how we interpret our artifacts that we're examining and exploring throughout the term. So when we think about interpretation, we also think about and we hear the word criticism tossed around. Criticism meaning not simply criticizing and saying certain bad things about a particular idea, but there can be constructive criticism and positive criticism, just basically meaning a very detailed way in which we examine and explore anything. In this case, we're looking at works of art or artifacts within the humanities. And there's a couple of different ways we can think about how we as individuals approach criticism and interpretation. And one way is a simple interpretation or simple criticism, and the other is more complex. So I want to talk about both of these here and how what you guys are doing in Humanities 100 and 200 involves a little bit of both. You're doing some simple and complex interpretation. On the simple side, it's more of a subjective or personal reflection on the different works of art or artifacts that you're looking at. It might be a little more individualized based on your own experiences, what kinds of works you are particularly drawn to. Personal preferences come into play here. It's a little more casual. It might have more to do with discussing different works or mediums or materials that you like in particular. So a simple interpretation could be something that we already do every day when you tell a friend about a film you just saw or a novel that you read or a TV show that you really like, and it's sharing that kind of criticism interpretation that way. And it also considers limited elements when you do this simple interpretation. So it considers the aesthetics, in other words, what we find appealing or beautiful, whether it's visually speaking or performance-wise, if it's music, if it's film, something that we find personally appealing in terms of aesthetics. It can also involve entertainment, just simply what we're drawn to as far as artifacts and works of art go in terms of what entertains us, what we enjoy. Popularity, this is another one that's in there when there's something going on, a film out in the theaters that everyone's going to see. It's part of this more simple interpretation or criticism of a work of art, what makes it popular, why we have that kind of mass interest in a particular work. And then a personal connection. So again, what it is that draws you into a particular work or a particular artifact in general. Maybe it's just simply something you enjoy, something that you find beautiful to look at or to consider, or maybe there's a personal cultural connection to it. It's something that you can relate to on a more cultural or society level. Then on the complex side of interpretation, it's a little bit more in depth. It's kind of delving into the work of art or the artifact in more detail, bringing in those kinds of details to discover what that interpretation or criticism might be. And the complex interpretation balances both the subjective and objective. So while on the simple side, it could be as something as simple as talking to a friend or a family member about a concert you just saw or why you like this particular artist and not this one. On the complex side, you're going to be bringing in a little bit of that, a little bit of the personal, but also balancing it with a more objective approach. So you're going to be thinking about the elements of the work in context. So it's not just a matter of whether or not you like the work or you find that music appealing or you like the style of this author and that's why you read all of his books. But it brings the elements into context. When was the work created? What was happening around the time of that work? What sort of themes and ideas are at play in this work? It considers the time period, again, when it was created. That's part of the context, the historical context. When was it created? Is it something that's new? Is it something that's based on a style from the past? And again, thinking about being based on styles, are there other influences? Do you like this artist because it reminds you of another artist that you've always enjoyed? Is there a new singer or musician who's come out now whose work is very similar to an old classical style that you were interested in? You start thinking about those kinds of influences and connections that make your criticism and interpretation a little more complex. And again, you think about it in terms of how it fits into its particular culture. So you're not just considering whether or not you find the work appealing, but you're asking yourself what it is about that cultural context that draws you in. When we talk about criticism and interpretation and how we interpret works of art and what we bring into it, there's always that question of who gets to decide. And it sort of goes along with that idea of the simple and complex, because on the one hand, there's always the idea that, well, everyone's a critic. Everyone can be, to a certain extent, an art critic, or someone who can comment on and reflect on the world of the humanities and the arts, because they are appealing to personal experience in a lot of ways, because they appeal to personal taste, or they may not appeal to personal taste. That's something that allows each of us to be a critic. They can appeal to our individual beliefs or our systems of faith, and our interpretation of those works can also depend on our own background and in terms of our beliefs and our taste, where we came from, where we grew up, what kind of family we grew up with. All of those can kind of color our interpretation and reflection on works of art, as well as our assumptions. We come into pretty much everything in life with a certain amount of assumptions or predisposed thoughts, and that can affect the way we look at works of art as well. And of course, our values. Again, the kind of values we were raised with or the values that we've developed and created over the years also have a strong influence on how we look at works of art. And then there's the idea of being an effective critic. Well, on the one hand, we're all naturally critics in one way or another because we have all those ingrained beliefs and backgrounds and values. Being an effective critic, again, takes that importance of balancing the subjective and the objective. So it's a matter of reflecting on it, not simply stopping with the fact that this is my personal taste or this is my personal preference, but why that might be. We compare and contrast when we're an effective critic. So we don't look at just one work of art in isolation. We might compare it and contrast it with others from the same time period or from very different time periods, but we compare and contrast in order to get a bigger picture. We bring in objective support. This is another word for bringing in your research or bringing in the facts and the details that you can find out there to help support your understanding and interpretation of a work of art. It's more of a balance act, like I was talking about before, where it's bringing in, of course, a little bit of that personal and subjective side of things, because we're human beings and we can't help but have personal reactions and responses to works of art. But it needs to be balanced in terms of being effective criticism with that objective research, facts, information that we can all agree on in an objective way. We also find effective critics looking for the universal idea, looking for that theme, that overriding theme that might connect particular works of art or what the individual artist might have been thinking about or had in mind when they created a particular piece. And what's the bigger message behind it, if there is one. And of course, considering that context. So not just looking at the work of art as this object that's on the wall or that's on television or on the movie screen or on a digital form of music or what have you, but considering it within the context of something larger. So it's not existing in a bubble or in a vacuum.